There's a specific kind of sound a person makes when the world has finally taken more than they have to give. It isn't a scream. It isn't even a sob. It's the sound of air leaving lungs that have forgotten why they're supposed to keep breathing. Out here, in the high deserts and the sun-bleached plains, that sound usually gets swallowed by the wind before it ever reaches another human ear. But today, the wind was still. If you believe that the old stories still have something to teach us today, if you find value in tales of justice, redemption, and the courage it takes to stand your ground, then you're in the right place. Before we ride into the heart of today's archive, do me a favor. Take a second to hit that like button. It tells the system that these stories matter. Subscribe and stay close to the fire, because out here, you never know when the wind is going to shift. And please tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you would never be forced to do, no matter the cost? Imagine a girl no older than 20, her hands raw and bleeding, clutching a rusted shovel in the middle of a piece of land that God forgot to water. She's staring at a hole in the dirt that looks more like a wound in a grave. She's shaking, not from the cold, because the heat is a physical weight on her shoulders, but from the sheer, crushing weight of a secret she was never meant to carry. When she looks up and sees a rider on the horizon, she doesn't feel hope. She feels the finality of a death sentence. And when she whispers those 5 words, "I can't do this anymore," she isn't just talking about the digging. She's talking about the lie. She's talking about the man who put her there. And she's talking about the fact that out here, the truth is often buried deeper than anybody. Welcome to South Wild West. This is where we tell the stories of history books were too polite to print. We talk about the grit in the fingernails, the blood on the saddle, and the quiet moral choices that define the frontier. We don't just tell stories about outlaws and lawmen. We tell stories about the human heart when it's pushed to the edge of the map. Now, settle in. Grab a cup of something warm. Let's head back to a summer. In 1884, to a stretch of dirt near the Colorado border, where a man named Elias Thorne was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can do is finish what they started. Elias Thorne was 52 years old, and he had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved out of a canyon wall and left to weather in the rain. He didn't look for trouble, mostly because he'd already spent half his life finding, and realized it didn't pay a living wage. He ran 300 head of cattle on a patch of land that was mostly rock and stubbornness. He saw the dust first, just a small, frantic plume a mile off the main trail. It wasn't the steady gait of a horse or the wide sweep of a wagon. It was stationary. He didn't rush. Rushing in the desert only makes you thirsty. He kept his mare at a steady walk, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. When he got within 100 yards, he saw her, a girl in a yellow dress that had been ruined by grease and clay. She was on her knees, the shovel lying across the pile of dirt like a discarded bone. Elias stopped his horse. He didn't reach for his rifle, but he kept his hands where she could see them. Out here, a scared person with a shovel is just as dangerous as a man with a Colt. That's a lot of work for a day this hot, Elias said. His voice was like 2 stones rubbing together. The girl didn't look up at first. Her head was bowed, her hair matted to her forehead. When she finally lifted her gaze, Elias felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. Her eyes were glassy, the pupils blown wide. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. It was barely more than a breath. "I can't finish it." Elias looked at the hole. It was 4 feet deep and 6 feet long. Too big for a dog, too small for a horse. It was a man's hole, but there was nobody nearby. No wagon, just her and the empty land. "Who's it for?" Elias asked. She didn't answer. She just stared at her hands. The skin on her palms had been torn away, the blood mixing with the dry grit to form a dark, ugly crust. Elias dismounted. He moved slow, the way you move around a calf caught in a briar patch. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and set it on the ground 5 feet from her. "Drink," he said. "Then you're going to pick that shovel back up." She looked at him then, her expression flickering from exhaustion to pure terror. "No, you don't understand. If I finish it, if it's done, then he come back." "If you don't finish it," Elias said, his voice hardening, "you'll be dead of heat stroke before the sun hits the ridge. I don't care who's coming back." "Out! Here, you finished the job you started. Pick it up." It sounded cruel. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a big, bearded rancher bullying a broken girl. But Elias saw the way her spirit was trying to leave her body. He knew that if she stopped now, she'd never start again. She needed the work to keep her grounded. She needed to dig until she found the bottom of her own fear. She gripped the handle. Her knuckles were white. With a shaky, agonizing effort, she shoved the blade into the hardpack. Elias stood over her, his shadow, providing the only bit of shade she had. He made her dig for another hour. He didn't help. He just watched. Every time she slowed, he'd say, "Again." Finally, the shovel hit something. Not a rock, not a root. It was the hollow, metallic thud of meeting iron-bound oak. The girl froze. She dropped the shovel and began to scramble out of the hole, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Elias reached down, caught her by the arm, not hard, but firm, and helped her up. She collapsed against a mound of dirt. Sobbing now, Elias jumped into the hole. He cleared away the loose soil with his boots. It wasn't a coffin. It was a heavy, reinforced strongbox, the kind the banks used to transport the truth, girl, Elias said. "Right now, before the dust on the horizon gets any closer." "It's not money," she choked out. "It's the ledgers, the land deeds for the whole valley. Wade Sterling. He's been burning the originals and burying the copies here. If the deeds are gone, the ranchers have no proof. He takes the land. He told me if I buried it, he'd let my brother go." Elias felt a weight settle in his gut. Wade Sterling was a polite man of the valley. He wore silk vests and spoke at the church. And he was currently the man who held the notes on Elias's own ranch. This wasn't a grave. It was a tomb for the future of every family in the county. We're halfway through the dirt now, and the sun is high. We've all been in a position like Sarah's, forced to do something that feels wrong, just to protect the people we love. But here's the question that defines a person. When the truth is finally uncovered, do you bury it again to stay safe, or do you lift it into the light, knowing it might burn you? Take a second right now. Look at the clock. What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how these stories travel through the night and into the morning across the world. And if you're finding yourself rooting for Elias Thorne, hit that like button. It helps us keep the lights on here at the archives. Elias Thorne is standing in a hole, staring at the theft of an entire valley. And the man who put it there is on his way. Let's see what happens when a man who has nothing left to lose decides to stop being polite. Elias took Sarah back to his ranch. He didn't ask her permission. He just put her on his horse and led the animal by the bridle. He left the box in the hole, but he covered it with a thin layer of brush. He needed to see if Wade Sterling would show up exactly where Sarah said he would. At the ranch, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of the open desert. It was the silence of a house that had been empty of a woman's voice for a long time. Elias set Sarah in a chair by the kitchen table. He moved with practiced. Sarah watched him. She looked like a bird that had been hit by a stone. "Why are you helping me? If he finds out, he'll kill you too." Elias washed his hands at the basin. He scrubbed the clay from under his fingernails. "He's already killing me, Sarah. He just does it with interest. Rates and legal fees instead of a shovel. I'd rather face him with a gun in my hand than a pen." Night fell over the ranch like a heavy wool blanket. The wind began to pick up, rattling the loose shingles on the barn. Elias sat on the porch, a Winchester, resting across his knees. He didn't light a lamp. Lamps were for people who wanted to be seen. Around midnight, Sarah came out. She was wearing one of Elias's old work shirts, the sleeves rolled up 4 times. She sat on the top step. "He's coming tomorrow," she said. "He has a deputy with him. Tom Larkin. Tom isn't a lawman. He's just a dog and a tin star." Elias nodded. He knew Larkin. Larkin was the kind of man who enjoyed the weight of a badge because it meant he didn't have to explain the bruises he left on. "People, go back inside. Sarah, sleep if you can. Tomorrow we go into town." "Town," she gasped. "That's where he is." "Exactly," Elias said. "Wade Sterling likes a stage. He likes people to see him, being the hero, so we're going to give him a show he didn't rehearse." The next morning, Elias found fresh tracks near his gate. 2 riders. They hadn't come to the house. They had circled the perimeter, testing the fence, looking for a weakness. It was a psychological game. Sterling wanted Elias to know he was being watched. Elias ignored it. He hitched the wagon, put Sarah in the seat, and placed a strongbox, which he had gone back for in the middle of the night, under a burlap sack in the back. As they rode toward the town of Black Rock, the heat returned, shimmering off the road. Sarah was trembling again, but this time her jaw was set. Elias looked at the town, a collection of weathered wood and false fronts. "Out! Here! Paper is just a promise, and a promise is only as good as the man who makes it. Today we're going to see what Wade Sterling's promise is worth." They pulled into the main street of Black Rock at noon. The town was busy. People were gathered near the general store, talking about the tragedy of the missing deeds. Wade Sterling was there, standing on the boardwalk, looking every bit the concerned citizens. He was comforting an old rancher, his hand on the man's shoulder, promising that the law would find a way. Deputy Larkin stood nearby, leaning against a hitching post, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. When Elias's wagon stopped in the middle of the street, the talking died down. It was a kind of silence that usually preceded a storm. Elias didn't get down. He stayed in the driver's seat, the reins loose in his hands. "Morning, Mr. Sterling," Elias called out. His voice carried, hitting the storefronts and bouncing back. Sterling smiled. It was a practiced, oily expression. "Elias, good to see you. And I see you found Sarah. We were all so worried when she wandered off. The heat can do strange things to a young woman's mind." Larkin straightened up, his hand drifting toward his belt. "She didn't wander off, Wade," Elias said. "She was busy. She was finishing a job you gave her. Only she got tired. So I helped her finish it." Sterling smiled and faltered, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. "I don't know what you're talking about, Elias. Perhaps you've been out in the sun, too. Long yourself." Elias stood up in the wagon. He reached back and pulled the burlap sack off the strongbox. The iron bands caught the light. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people recognized the seal. "This box was in a hole 4 miles out on my north range," Elias said, his voice rising. Sarah was digging it. Larkin moved then. He stepped into the street, his hand on his holster. "That's enough, Thorne. You're interfering with a territorial investigation. Hand over the box and step down." Elias didn't look at Larkin. He kept his eyes on Sterling. "You want the box. Wade, come get it. In front of everyone. Tell them why the governor's seal is sitting in a hole on my land." Sterling looked around. He saw the faces of the townspeople, the people he had been comforting 5 minutes ago. He saw the doubt beginning to turn into anger. He realized he had lost the stage. "Larkin," Sterling hissed, "do your job." Larkin drew his revolver. He was fast, but he was arrogant. He thought a rancher in a wagon was an easy target. Elias didn't draw a gun. He threw the heavy iron-bound box. He didn't throw it at Larkin. He threw it down into the street. The box hit the hard-packed dirt with a bone-jarring crash. The lock, already weakened by Elias's sledgehammer earlier that morning, snapped. The lid flew open. A gust of wind caught the top layer of papers, sending land deeds and ledgers fluttering across the dirt like the wings of white birds. Larkin hesitated, his eyes following the paper. That was his mistake. Elias was out of the wagon before the box had even stopped vibrating. He hit Larkin with a shoulder charge that sent the deputy sprawling into the dust. He didn't use a gun. He used his fists, the hard, scarred hands of a man who had spent 30 years working the land. It wasn't a fight. It was an eviction. Every punch was for a year of interest. Every strike was for a neighbor who had been helped into poverty. By the time the crowd pulled Elias off, Larkin was a bloody mess in the dirt, and Wade Sterling was backing away, his face pale, his silk vest covered in the very dust he had tried to steal. The aftermath wasn't like the stories in the dime novels. There were no medals. There was just a lot of paperwork and a very long, quiet ride back to the ranch. The territorial marshal came down from Denver a week later. The deeds were verified. Wade Sterling vanished before the hand. Until next time, keep your eyes on the horizon and your hands on the truth. The desert is wide, but it can't hide everything forever.